Welcome to our deep dive into the book of Exodus. Today, we're exploring one of the most captivating books of the Bible, filled with epic stories of liberation, faith, and divine intervention. We'll journey through Moses' life, the Israelites' escape from Egypt, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and the receiving of the Ten Commandments. But there's so much more than just historical events. We'll uncover the timeless lessons and powerful symbolism that continue to resonate today. Whether you're new to Exodus or revisiting it, join us as we unlock the profound meaning of this ancient text. Moses' Call and Mission, chapters 3-4. The setting and divine encounter, Exodus 3 verses 1-6. The story begins with Moses tending sheep in Midian, where he has been living in exile after fleeing from Egypt. At Mount Horeb, also known as the Mountain of God, Moses encounters a burning bush that is not consumed by the flames. Intrigued, he approaches, and God calls to him by name from the bush. Moses responds, "Here I am," an indication of openness, though perhaps without full understanding of the significance of this moment. God immediately instructs Moses to remove his sandals, as he is standing on holy ground. This command emphasizes the sacred nature of the encounter, highlighting God's holiness and the reverence due in his presence. God introduces himself as the God of Moses' ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, linking Moses' call to the larger story of Israel's covenant relationship with God. Overwhelmed, Moses hides his face, a gesture of fear and respect in the presence of divine holiness. God's mission and compassion for his people, Exodus 3 verses 7-10. God explains to Moses that he has seen the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt and has heard their cries under oppressive slavery. This moment underscores God's compassion and active concern for his people, establishing him as a God who is intimately aware of human suffering. He has come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them to a land of abundance, a land flowing with milk and honey, promised to the ancestors of Israel. The heart of God's mission for Moses is then stated. Moses is to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. This is a monumental task, given the power dynamics between the Israelites and the Egyptians, and it requires a leader willing to challenge the authority of Pharaoh. God is positioning Moses as a deliverer and leader, although Moses himself has yet to realize the full weight of this responsibility. Moses' initial hesitation, Exodus 3 verses 11-12. Moses responds to God's command with doubt, questioning his own suitability for such a task. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" This question reflects a mix of humility and insecurity, likely stemming from his identity as a former Egyptian prince and a fugitive in Midian. God reassures Moses, not by boosting his self-confidence, but by promising divine presence. "I will be with you." God's answer places the emphasis on his power and support rather than Moses' capabilities. God also provides a sign, the promise that, after leading the people out of Egypt, Moses and the Israelites will worship God on this mountain. This promise both confirms God's plan and serves as a reminder that the deliverance is part of a larger journey toward worship and relationship with God. The revelation of God's name, Exodus 3 verses 13-15, Moses raises another concern. If he goes to the Israelites and they ask the name of the God who sent him, what should he say? In response, God reveals his name as "I am who I am" in Hebrew, often rendered as YHWH or Yahweh. This name, often translated as "I am" or "I am who I am," signifies God's self-existence, eternal presence, and unchanging nature. Unlike the gods of the nations, who were often seen as limited and specific to regions, Yahweh is absolute and not confined to human limitations. God instructs Moses to tell the Israelites that "I am" has sent him, associating this name with the God of their ancestors. By using this name, God is affirming that he is the same God who made covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, linking Moses' mission to a historical and relational continuity with his people. God's plan for deliverance, Exodus 3 verses 16-22. God then outlines his plan in greater detail, instructing Moses to assemble the elders of Israel and tell them that God has seen their suffering and intends to deliver them. They are to request a 3-day journey into the wilderness to make sacrifices to God, a seemingly modest request that is meant to test Pharaoh's willingness to allow any degree of freedom. God also warns that Pharaoh will not let them go willingly, which hints at the coming struggles and the plagues that will ultimately compel him to release the Israelites. This prophecy prepares Moses for the resistance he will face and shows that God's plan includes not only deliverance but judgment upon Egypt for its oppression of Israel. Moses' objections and God's assurance, Exodus 4 verses 1-17. Despite God's reassurances, Moses expresses further doubts, fearing that the Israelites will not believe that God has appeared to him. In response, God provides 3 signs for Moses to perform: transforming his staff into a serpent, making his hand leprous and then restoring it, and turning water from the Nile into blood. These miracles serve as both proof of God's power and as reassurance to Moses that he is indeed chosen by God. They are signs that will demonstrate to the Israelites and, later, to Pharaoh, the authority with which Moses speaks. Yet, Moses continues to hesitate, citing his lack of eloquence and slow speech as potential obstacles to fulfilling God's mission. This objection reveals Moses' deep-seated insecurity, as he worries that he will not be able to articulate the message effectively before Pharaoh. God, however, responds that he is the creator of human speech and will help Moses speak and instruct him in what to say. Here, God not only reassures Moses but reasserts his sovereignty as the creator who equips his chosen servants. When Moses still resists, asking God to send someone else, God becomes angry. However, he agrees to let Aaron, Moses' brother, assist him as a spokesperson. This compromise respects Moses' reluctance while keeping him in the role God has assigned to him. With Aaron's assistance, God strengthens Moses, providing both the support and partnership he seems to need. The return to Egypt and final preparations, Exodus 4 verses 18-31. After his encounter with God, Moses returns to Jethro, his father-in-law, and requests permission to go back to Egypt. This moment marks the beginning of Moses' obedience to God's command. As Moses sets out with his family, God warns him that Pharaoh will harden his heart, indicating that the deliverance will not come easily and that Moses must be prepared for resistance. Threatens Moses' life until Zipporah, his wife, circumcises their son. This act likely signifies the importance of covenantal obedience, suggesting that Moses, as the leader of Israel, must be fully aligned with God's requirements before taking on the mission. Upon arriving in Egypt, Moses and Aaron gather the elders of Israel. Aaron, as promised, serves as Moses' spokesperson, performing the signs God had provided. The people believe, and their response of worship marks the beginning of their journey from despair to hope. The people recognize that God has seen their affliction, a moment of divine validation that sets the stage for the unfolding drama of liberation. Themes and theological significance. The call and mission of Moses in Exodus 3-4 present a rich tapestry of themes central to the book of Exodus and the broader biblical narrative. Divine compassion and covenant. God's decision to intervene is rooted in his covenant with Israel and his compassion for their suffering. The promise to deliver them connects the Exodus narrative to the ancestral promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's presence and sovereignty. The burning bush encounter emphasizes God's holiness and his transcendent presence. His name, I am who I am, reveals his eternal nature and sovereign freedom, affirming that his actions are not subject to human limitations. Human weakness and divine empowerment. Moses' repeated objections and insecurities highlight the gap between human frailty and the demands of divine missions. God's responses to Moses, offering signs, reassurance, and the assistance of Aaron, demonstrate that God equips those he calls, working through their weaknesses. The role of signs and wonders. The miraculous signs serve as both encouragement for Moses and a means of establishing authority before the Israelites and Egyptians. These signs set the stage for the dramatic plagues that will later unfold in Egypt, underscoring that deliverance comes through God's direct intervention. In summary, Exodus 3-4 is an essential passage that establishes Moses' mission, reveals God's character, and foreshadows the challenges and victories to come. Moses' calling exemplifies the themes of faith, obedience, and divine partnership that resonate throughout the Bible, showing how God chooses, empowers, and remains present with his people in the face of daunting challenges. These chapters are a reminder that, even amid personal insecurities and external opposition, divine purpose prevails through God's faithfulness and the courage of those who respond to his call. The 10 Plagues in Exodus, chapters 5-13, Initial Confrontation and Pharaoh's Refusal, Exodus 5-6. In chapter 5, Moses and Aaron confront Pharaoh with God's command, "Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh, however, responds with disdain and disbelief, asking, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go?" His refusal reflects his ignorance of Yahweh's sovereignty and his unwillingness to submit to any higher authority. Pharaoh then increases the Israelites' workload, forcing them to make bricks without supplying straw, which intensifies their suffering. The Israelites blame Moses and Aaron for their worsening conditions, and Moses turns to God in frustration, questioning why God has allowed such hardships to increase. In response, God reassures Moses, reminding him of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and promises that he will redeem Israel with an outstretched arm and mighty acts of judgment. This reassurance emphasizes that God's plan will prevail, despite temporary setbacks. The 10 Plagues, Signs of Divine Power, Exodus 7-11. The 10 plagues that follow are God's response to Pharaoh's defiance. Each plague is a demonstration of God's power, intended to confront Pharaoh's arrogance, discredit the Egyptian gods, and establish Yahweh's authority over creation. These plagues progress in severity, beginning with discomforts and escalating to the destruction of life. The 10 plagues include: the Nile turns to blood, Exodus 7 verses 14-24. God turns the Nile River into blood, making it undrinkable and killing the fish. This act challenges the Egyptian god of the Nile, Hapi, symbolizing God's power over Egyptian life sources. The Plague of Frogs, Exodus 8 verses 1-15. Frogs swarm throughout Egypt, even in homes. Although Pharaoh asks Moses to remove them and promises freedom, he reneges on his word once the frogs are gone. The Plague of Gnats, Exodus 8 verses 16-19. Dust turns into gnats, affecting people and animals alike. This plague is notable because the Egyptian magicians cannot replicate it, acknowledging, "This is the finger of God." The Plague of Flies, Exodus 8 verses 20-32. Swarms of flies invade Egyptian homes, while the region of Goshen, where the Israelites live, is spared. This selective impact distinguishes God's people and demonstrates his control over nature. The Plague on Livestock, Exodus 9 verses 1-7. A disease kills the Egyptian livestock, sparing Israelite animals. This plague targets Egypt's agricultural stability and the reverence they held for animals like bulls, which were symbols of strength and fertility. The Plague of Boils, Exodus 9 verses 8-12. Boils break out on Egyptians and their animals, demonstrating God's ability to afflict health and further frustrating the magicians, who are unable to help. The Plague of Hail, Exodus 9 verses 13-35. Hail destroys crops and livestock. Pharaoh initially promises to release the Israelites, but changes his mind again once the plague ceases. This plague devastates Egyptian agriculture, symbolizing God's dominance over natural forces. The Plague of Locusts, Exodus 10 verses 1-20. Locusts devour the remaining crops, plunging Egypt into famine. Pharaoh's officials, seeing the devastation, urge him to let Israel go, but Pharaoh remains stubborn. The Plague of Darkness, Exodus 10 verses 21-29. A deep darkness covers Egypt for 3 days, except in Goshen. This plague targets the sun god, Ra, highlighting Yahweh's power over light and dark, a fundamental part of Egyptian religious beliefs. The Plague on the Firstborn, Exodus 11. Finally, God announces the death of the firstborn in every Egyptian household, from Pharaoh's son to the firstborn of animals. This plague, unlike the others, is a direct act of divine justice for Egypt's oppression of Israel and the death of Israelite children under Pharaoh's earlier decrees. Each plague is symbolic, not only showcasing God's power but systematically dismantling Egypt's idols and asserting Yahweh's supremacy. These signs are also aimed at the Israelites, proving that their God is real, powerful, and committed to their deliverance. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Throughout the plagues, Pharaoh's heart is described as hardened, preventing him from letting the Israelites go. Sometimes Pharaoh hardens his own heart. Other times, God hardens it. This dynamic suggests both human responsibility and divine sovereignty, illustrating that Pharaoh's continued defiance makes him complicit in his fate, even as God's judgment upon Egypt unfolds. Pharaoh's hardened heart serves to highlight the seriousness of resisting divine authority, while God's hardening of it shows his control over events, bringing about his will for Israel's deliverance and Egypt's judgment. The institution of Passover, Exodus 12. In chapter 12, God instructs the Israelites to observe the Passover, marking their protection from the coming plague on the firstborn. Each family is to sacrifice a lamb, marking their doorposts with its blood so that God's destroyer will pass over their homes, sparing them from death. This ritual establishes several key symbols. The lamb. The lamb becomes a symbol of substitutionary sacrifice, where its blood protects the Israelites from death. This imagery has deep theological significance in later Jewish and Christian traditions. Unleavened bread. God commands the Israelites to eat unleavened bread, symbolizing the haste with which they will leave Egypt. Leaven, yeast, often symbolizes sin or impurity, so unleavened bread becomes a symbol of purity and readiness for deliverance. Memorial feast. Passover is instituted as a perpetual feast, reminding future generations of God's deliverance. This ritual keeps alive the memory of God's salvation, anchoring Israel's identity in God's act of liberation. Through Passover, the Israelites not only experience deliverance, but also begin to understand themselves as a people saved by divine intervention. The Passover marks a covenantal moment between God and Israel, as they trust in his protection and begin a new chapter in their relationship with him. The Exodus and the departure from Egypt, Exodus 12:31 to 13:22. After the plague on the firstborn, Pharaoh finally releases the Israelites. The Egyptians urge them to leave quickly, fearing further destruction, and even give the Israelites silver, gold, and clothing, fulfilling God's promise that they would plunder the Egyptians. Approximately 600,000 men, plus women, children, and livestock, depart, a multitude that signifies both God's faithfulness to Abraham's descendants and the magnitude of his deliverance. God then leads the Israelites on an indirect route through the wilderness toward the Red Sea, avoiding the Philistine territory to prevent immediate conflict. He goes before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, representing his presence and guidance. These signs underscore that God is with his people, not only in their deliverance but also in their journey ahead. Consecration of the firstborn, Exodus 13. In chapter 13, God commands the Israelites to consecrate every firstborn to him, a symbolic gesture that recalls the final plague. This act reinforces the cost of Israel's freedom and reminds them of God's mercy. By dedicating their firstborn, the Israelites acknowledge that their children and livestock were spared by divine grace. The consecration of the firstborn thus becomes a ritual of gratitude, serving as a continual reminder of God's deliverance. Theological themes and significance. The narrative of the 10 plagues and the Exodus is rich with theological significance, illustrating key themes that shape Israel's identity and relationship with God. God's sovereignty and power. The plagues demonstrate God's supreme authority over creation, life, and death, contrasting him with Egypt's powerless gods. God's control over natural forces, his timing, and his intervention affirm his sovereignty in human history. Divine justice and mercy. The plagues reveal God's justice, as he responds to Pharaoh's oppression with corresponding judgments. However, in sparing Israel and allowing Egypt time to repent, God also shows mercy, giving Pharaoh multiple opportunities to submit before the final judgment. The role of faith and obedience. Passover requires faith on the part of the Israelites. They must trust that the lamb's blood will protect them and follow God's commands to experience salvation. This obedience reflects the foundational role of faith in their relationship with God. Covenant and identity. The Exodus marks the beginning of Israel's identity as a people set apart by God. The Passover feast, the consecration of the firstborn, and the observance of the Feast of Unleavened Bread are rituals that reinforce their covenantal relationship with God and shape their communal memory. Liberation and worship. The goal of the Exodus is not only freedom from slavery, but also the freedom to worship God. The plagues and deliverance are part of God's broader plan for Israel to become His people, devoted to His laws and worship. The covenant at Mount Sinai, chapters 19 to 24. Preparation for the covenant, Exodus 19 verses 1 to 15. After escaping Egypt and journeying through the wilderness, the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai in the third month. God calls Moses to ascend the mountain and conveys His intentions to enter into a covenant with Israel. God instructs Moses to tell the people that if they obey His commandments, they will become His treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This identity is distinct from the nations around them and points to their unique relationship with God. Israel is not only being set apart, but is also given the responsibility of representing God's holiness to the world. The people agree to God's terms, pledging, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." This collective response shows their willingness to enter into a binding relationship with God, where obedience and worship are central. However, this willingness will be tested repeatedly throughout their journey. God then instructs the Israelites to prepare for 3 days by consecrating themselves, washing their clothes, and abstaining from physical intimacy. This period of purification highlights the sacredness of the forthcoming event. Additionally, the people are forbidden from approaching the mountain, under penalty of death, which reinforces the separation between the divine and human realms. This separation underscores God's holiness and sets the stage for a dramatic encounter between God and Israel. The theophany at Mount Sinai, Exodus 19 verses 16 to 25. On the third day, God reveals Himself in a dramatic theophany, a manifestation of divine presence, with thunder, lightning, a thick cloud, and the sound of a trumpet. Mount Sinai is enveloped in smoke, and the mountain itself trembles, symbolizing the overwhelming power and holiness of God. The sensory intensity of this moment is intended to communicate the gravity of the encounter and evoke reverence and awe. God calls Moses to the top of the mountain, reiterating the warning not to let the people or priests approach lest they die. Moses then descends to ensure that the people respect these boundaries. This scene not only establishes the profound holiness of God, but also the need for boundaries between the divine and human spheres. The Ten Commandments, Exodus 20 verses 1 to 17. The heart of the covenant is revealed in the Ten Commandments, or Decalogue, which are given directly by God. These commandments serve as the foundational ethical and spiritual principles for the Israelite community. They are divided into 2 categories. The first 4 address the relationship between God and humanity, and the last 6 govern relationships between people. Commandments 1 to 4, relationship with God. No other gods. Israel must worship Yahweh alone, reflecting their monotheistic identity and their exclusive covenant with God. No idols. The prohibition against idols protects Israel from the influence of surrounding pagan practices and reinforces God's incomparability. Honor God's name. God's name must be revered, showing respect for His authority and presence. Sabbath rest. Observing the Sabbath acknowledges God as Creator and serves as a weekly reminder of liberation from slavery. It promotes rest, equality, and spiritual focus. Commandments 5 to 10. Relationship with others. Honor parents. Respect for parents supports family structure and social stability. No murder. This command protects the sanctity of life, a gift from God. No adultery. Faithfulness in marriage upholds family integrity and mutual respect. No stealing. Protecting property rights fosters trust and security within the community. No false witness. Honesty is crucial for justice and communal trust. No coveting. By addressing inner desires, this commandment promotes contentment and guards against jealousy and greed. These commandments emphasize justice, respect, and loyalty, values that would shape Israel's identity and serve as a witness to other nations. The fear and reverence of the people. Exodus 20 verses 18 to 21. After hearing God speak, the people are terrified and ask Moses to act as an intermediary between them and God, fearing they might die if God speaks directly to them again. This request underscores the overwhelming nature of God's holiness and the people's awareness of their unworthiness. Moses reassures them, explaining that God's display of power is meant to instill a reverent fear that will motivate them to avoid sin. Moses then draws near to the thick darkness where God is present. This image of God in darkness symbolizes both the mystery of his nature and the need for humanity to approach him with humility and respect. The Covenant Code. Additional laws. Exodus 20:22 to 23:33. Following the Ten Commandments, God provides Moses with a detailed set of laws often called the Covenant Code. These laws elaborate on how Israel should live as a holy nation and cover various aspects of community life, justice, worship, and social ethics. Some of the key areas addressed include laws on worship. God instructs the people to make simple altars for worship, forbidding elaborate or idolatrous practices. These laws reinforce the simplicity and exclusivity of Israelite worship, focusing on sincerity over spectacle, social justice, and compassion. Many laws emphasize the need to protect vulnerable individuals, such as slaves, foreigners, widows, and orphans. For example, the law requires fair treatment of slaves, respect for women, and kindness toward foreigners. These laws reflect God's compassion and desire for a just society, encouraging Israel to be distinct from the oppressive practices of other nations. Property rights and restitution. Several laws address property rights and the importance of restitution in cases of theft or damage. These laws emphasize accountability, fairness, and responsibility within the community. Sabbath and festivals. God establishes the Sabbath year and the observance of 3 annual festivals: the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering. These practices not only reinforce the rhythm of worship, but also remind the people of God's provision and their dependence on Him. Justice and integrity. The code includes laws against bribery, false testimony, and mistreatment of the vulnerable. These principles uphold integrity, fairness, and protection for the disadvantaged, promoting a society grounded in justice and compassion. The ratification of the covenant. Exodus 24. Chapter 24 describes the formal ratification of the covenant. Moses relays God's words to the people, and they respond, "All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do." Moses writes down God's commands, builds an altar, and sacrifices young bulls, symbolizing the sealing of the covenant through blood. Moses then performs a ritual, sprinkling half of the blood on the altar and the other half on the people, declaring, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you." This act signifies a binding agreement, sealed by sacrificial blood, which honors the gravity and permanence of the covenant. Following this, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders ascend the mountain and experience a unique vision of God. They saw the God of Israel, and though details are sparse, the experience suggests a direct yet mysterious encounter with God. They share a meal in God's presence, symbolizing fellowship and the peace established by the covenant. Moses then ascends further alone, where he will receive tablets of stone inscribed with the law. He remains on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, during which time he receives additional instructions for the construction of the tabernacle. Themes and theological significance. The covenant at Mount Sinai introduces themes central to Israel's faith and identity: holiness and separation. The emphasis on boundaries, purity, and consecration shows that Israel is to be set apart from other nations, reflecting God's holiness in every aspect of life. The covenant establishes a unique relationship between God and Israel, calling them to live in a way that reflects divine values. Law as relationship. The laws are not merely regulations but expressions of a covenant relationship. Obedience to these laws enables Israel to enjoy God's blessings and maintain a relationship with Him. This covenant is therefore both legal and relational, founded on mutual commitment, justice, and compassion. The covenant codes focus on justice for the vulnerable, honesty in relationships, and care for others shows that God's laws are meant to create a compassionate and just society. Israel is called to model these divine qualities. Covenant as community identity. Through these laws and the formal ratification, Israel becomes a covenant community with a shared purpose and identity. Their role as a kingdom of priests signifies that their relationship with God is both individual and collective, reflecting a unity grounded in God's commands. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the book of Exodus. We hope you've gained new insights into its powerful themes of freedom, faith, and resilience. From the story of Moses to the covenant at Mount Sinai, Exodus offers lessons that still inspire us today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into ancient texts. Let us know your thoughts or questions in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and continue seeking wisdom. See you soon.